Title: The Deadliest Prison Rule in Los Angeles, USA. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. The Invisible Constitution. In the heart of downtown Los Angeles, just blocks from gleaming corporate towers and luxury condominiums, stands a structure that operates by two sets of rules. The first set is written in policy manuals, state codes, and federal regulations. The second set exists nowhere on paper, yet it governs with absolute authority. This second constitution, unwritten, unforgiving, and enforced through violence, has claimed more lives than any official policy ever could. Welcome to the Los Angeles County Jail System, the largest jail complex in the world, where an average daily population of nearly 22,000 people lives under a shadow government more powerful than the one that built the walls around them. The deadliest rule in this invisible constitution is deceptively simple. Never cooperate with authority. Never provide information. Never tell. This isn't just a preference. It isn't merely a suggestion whispered among inmates during yard time. This is the fundamental law of survival, and its violation carries a sentence more severe than any judge could impose: death. The anatomy of silence. To understand why this rule exists and why it kills, you must first understand the ecosystem in which it thrives. The LA County Jail System isn't a single facility. It's a sprawling network of detention centers, with Men's Central Jail serving as its beating heart since 1963. Originally designed to house a fraction of its current population, Men's Central has become synonymous with overcrowding, violence, and institutional failure. According to documented records, 103 people have died in LA County jails since the beginning of 2023. These aren't just statistics. Each number represents a person whose final days were spent in a system that UCLA researchers found systematically fails its most vulnerable inhabitants. Their investigation revealed that the majority of Black and Latinx men dying in these facilities showed clear evidence of physical violence, contradicting official narratives that often attributed deaths to natural causes or medical emergencies. But the violence doesn't begin and end with these fatalities. It permeates every interaction, every transaction, every moment of existence within these walls. And at the center of this violence sits the no-snitching rule, a code so absolute that even discussing its violations can prove fatal. The price of words. In the free world, cooperation with law enforcement is often seen as civic duty. Inside LA County Jail, it's a death warrant. The rule operates on multiple levels. At its most basic, it forbids inmates from providing any information to guards, deputies, or administrators about criminal activities, violence, or rule violations occurring within the facility. But its reach extends far beyond this simple prohibition. Inmates cannot report theft of their property. They cannot identify their attackers after an assault. They cannot warn officials about planned violence, even if innocent people will be harmed. They cannot testify in disciplinary hearings. They cannot file grievances that name other inmates. The enforcement mechanism is brutally efficient. When an inmate is suspected of cooperating with authorities, or even perceived as potentially willing to cooperate, they are labeled with terms that carry death sentences: snitch, rat, informant, or in prison slang, cheese eater. Once labeled, the inmate becomes what gang hierarchies call no good, a designation that marks them for violence that can come at any moment from any direction. According to research on inmate codes, telling on another inmate to staff is considered one of the absolute worst violations possible. The consequences aren't limited to the individual violator. In some cases, entire housing units can face restrictions or punishments if one member is discovered cooperating with authorities. This creates a collective enforcement system where every inmate becomes a potential enforcer of the rule, whether they personally subscribe to the code or not. The architecture of fear. The no-snitching rule doesn't exist in isolation. It's the foundation upon which an entire parallel government operates. This shadow administration runs on fear, violence, and a hierarchy more rigid than anything in the official jail system. At the top of this hierarchy sit the shot callers, senior gang members who exercise absolute authority over their respective populations. These individuals make decisions about everything from cell assignments to who eats first in the dining hall. They resolve disputes, levy taxes, authorize violence, and most critically, they identify violations of the code. In the LA County Jail System, the most powerful organization is the Mexican Mafia, also known as LAIM. This prison gang, which originated in the California correction system in the 1950s, maintains iron control through a system of taxes, tributes, and terror. According to documented evidence, Gangs and drug dealers who refuse to pay protection money to the Mexican mafia face murder or credible threats of murder. But the enforcement of payment depends entirely on the no-snitching rule. Victims cannot report the extortion, witnesses cannot testify, and the system continues unimpeded. The Mexican mafia operates through what's known as the green light system. Lists called verdes or green lights identify entire gangs or specific individuals marked for violence because they violated prison gang codes. Being placed on a green light list means open season has been declared on your life. Any gang member who encounters you is not just permitted but often required to attack you. The only way off a green light list is through violence, payment, or in some cases, a formal review by gang leadership. A process that operates entirely outside official channels and depends absolutely on the continued enforcement of the no-snitching rule. The mathematics of survival. For inmates entering the LA County jail system, the calculation is stark and immediate. On one side, the theoretical protection offered by reporting violence, seeking help from authorities, or cooperating with investigations. On the other side, the absolute certainty of violent retaliation if you're discovered cooperating. The mathematics favor silence. Official protective custody exists in theory, but in practice, it's often insufficient, temporary, or worse. A label that follows you throughout the system, marking you as someone who couldn't survive general population. Protective custody can mean 23-hour lockdown, extreme isolation, and the permanent stigma of being unable to walk the yard. For many inmates, especially those facing years in the system or those who must eventually return to neighborhoods controlled by the same gangs that run the jails, protective custody isn't protection. It's just a different kind of death sentence. The overcrowding crisis exacerbates every aspect of this dynamic. With nearly 22,000 people packed into facilities designed for far fewer, supervision becomes impossible. Deputies patrol vast housing units where they're outnumbered by hundreds. Sightlines are obstructed. Cameras have blind spots. Violence occurs in seconds, and by the time authorities respond, the attackers have melted back into the general population, protected by a wall of silence that no investigation can penetrate. According to available records, one gang operating in LA County Jail distributed a written list of 28 rules for prisoners to follow. While the complete list isn't publicly available, documented gang constitutions from similar facilities universally include prohibitions against cooperating with authorities as the first and most serious rule. These written codes simply formalize what everyone already knows. Speaking to authorities about internal matters is the unforgivable sin. The cycle of violence. The no-snitching rule creates a self-perpetuating cycle that makes the jail more dangerous for everyone, including those who enforce the rule. When violence cannot be reported, it cannot be investigated. When it cannot be investigated, perpetrators face no consequences. When perpetrators face no consequences, violence increases. When violence increases, the rule becomes even more necessary for survival, and the cycle accelerates. This dynamic explains why reform efforts have consistently failed to reduce violence in the LA County jail system despite decades of litigation, consent decrees, and oversight. You cannot reform a system when the people inside it operate under a completely different legal framework, one that carries more immediate and certain consequences than any official sanction. The irony is profound. The rule that inmates believe keeps them safe is the same rule that makes their environment lethally dangerous. By preventing cooperation with authorities, the no-snitching code ensures that predators operate freely, that gang hierarchies maintain absolute power, and that violence remains the primary currency of the institution. The institutional response. Jail administrators and law enforcement officials are acutely aware of the no-snitching rule and its consequences, yet their tools for combating it are limited. Enhanced surveillance, increased staffing, improved classification systems. All of these measures run against the fundamental reality that inmates face more immediate danger from their peers than from official sanctions. Some facilities have attempted to create anonymous reporting systems, confidential hotlines, or digital reporting mechanisms that protect the identity of those providing information. These systems have seen limited success, primarily because the inmates understand something that administrators often don't. In a closed environment where your daily life depends on relationships and reputation, there are no truly anonymous reports. Someone always sees who walks into the office. Someone always notices who's called out for a private conversation. Someone always knows. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, which operates the jail system, has faced repeated criticism and multiple federal investigations regarding conditions in the facilities. Oversight bodies have documented excessive force by deputies, inadequate medical care, and dangerous overcrowding. Yet none of these investigations have successfully addressed the shadow government operating within the walls, because that government exists precisely in the spaces where official authority cannot reach, in the silence enforced by the deadliest rule. Conclusion: the unbreakable code. As night falls over downtown Los Angeles, the lights come on in Men's Central Jail and the other facilities scattered throughout the county. Inside, 22,000 people navigate an existence governed by rules that will never appear in any manual, enforced by authorities that wear no badges, carrying sentences that no court will ever review. The no-snitching rule stands at the center of this parallel universe, a simple prohibition that has become the foundation of a complete system of governance. It keeps inmates silent in the face of theft, quiet during assaults, and mute when they witness murder. It protects gang hierarchies, enables extortion, and ensures that the most violent predators face no accountability for their actions. This rule will claim more lives this year as it has every year before. And until the fundamental dynamics that make silence safer than cooperation change, it will continue to be the deadliest rule in Los Angeles County, and perhaps in the entire American correction system. But the story doesn't end here. To understand how deep the rule runs, we must examine the specific mechanisms of its enforcement, the individuals who have paid the ultimate price for violating it, and the gang structures that maintain it with ruthless efficiency. The enforcers. The morning count begins at 6 a.m. in Men's Central Jail. Deputies move through the housing units, verifying that each inmate is present and accounted for. But there's another count happening simultaneously, one that never appears in official records. The shot callers are taking inventory of their own, tracking debts, identifying new arrivals, marking targets, and most importantly, watching for anyone who might violate the code. This is the invisible infrastructure that makes the no-snitching rule operational. Without enforcers, the rule would be merely a suggestion. With them, it becomes absolute law. To understand how the deadliest rule in Los Angeles maintains its power, you must understand the people who enforce it and the system they've built within the system. The pyramid of power. The enforcement hierarchy in LA County Jail mirrors the structure of organized crime on the streets, but compressed and intensified by the confined environment. At the apex sit the Mexican Mafia members, full-fledged carnales who have been formally inducted into La Im through blood rituals that often require killing on command. These individuals exercise authority that extends far beyond the jail walls, reaching into state prisons, federal facilities, and the streets of Southern California. According to law enforcement documentation, the Mexican Mafia operates as the dominant force in LA County's jails despite representing a relatively small percentage of the total inmate population. Their power derives not from numbers but from organization, ruthlessness, and decades of institutional knowledge about how to control closed environments. When a Mexican Mafia member speaks, everyone listens, not out of respect but out of the certain knowledge that disobedience means violence. Directly below the carnales are the soldados, soldiers who carry out orders, collect taxes, and deliver punishment. These individuals are often working toward full membership in La Im, proving their reliability and willingness to use violence on command. They serve as the operational arm of the organization, translating high-level decisions into concrete actions on the tiers and in the day rooms. Supporting this structure are the associates and sympathizers, inmates who may not be formal gang members but who align themselves with the Mexican Mafia for protection or profit. These individuals serve as eyes and ears throughout the facility, reporting on conversations, monitoring new arrivals, and maintaining the surveillance network that makes it nearly impossible to cooperate with authorities without detection. Parallel powers. While the Mexican Mafia dominates, they're not the only organization enforcing the no-snitching rule. LA County Jail houses members of hundreds of street gangs, from the massive Bloods and Crips sets to smaller neighborhood cliques. Each of these organizations maintains its own internal code that prohibits cooperation with authorities. The relationship between different gang factions and the Mexican Mafia follows a complex political structure. According to documented gang dynamics, most black gangs operate with relative independence regarding their internal affairs but must still respect La Im's overarching authority on certain matters, particularly those involving taxation and violence against other Hispanic inmates. This creates a layered enforcement system where multiple organizations are simultaneously watching for code violations. The Sereno gangs, Southern California Hispanic street gangs that pay tribute to the Mexican Mafia, serve as the most direct enforcers of La Im's will. Documented evidence shows that these gangs, which include hundreds of individual sets throughout Southern California, are required to follow Mexican Mafia directives or face green light status themselves. When the Mexican mafia identifies someone as a snitch, Sereno gang members become the enforcement arm, carrying out attacks that may have been ordered by someone they've never met, against someone they have no personal conflict with. This distributed enforcement system makes the no-snitching rule nearly impossible to violate without consequences. Even if you manage to avoid members of your own gang after cooperating with authorities, you must still navigate a facility filled with members of allied gangs who are obligated to attack you on sight. The mechanics of identification. How do enforcers identify snitches in a system where most cooperation with authorities happens in private conversations or written statements? The answer reveals a surveillance network that would impress intelligence agencies. First, there's direct observation. Despite efforts by jail staff to maintain confidentiality, certain actions are impossible to hide. When an inmate is called to an administrative office for an extended period, others notice. When someone is transferred immediately after a violent incident, questions are asked. When disciplinary charges are filed against specific inmates following an event with multiple witnesses, the math isn't difficult. Enforcers have developed sophisticated methods for detecting cooperation. They watch for pattern changes. An inmate who suddenly receives better housing assignments, reduced charges, or early release dates without apparent explanation becomes suspect. They monitor court records, which are often public, looking for cases where testimony from other inmates appears. They maintain networks of sympathizers among jail staff who either through coercion or compensation, provide information about who's talking to authorities. According to research on prison gang intelligence operations, some organizations conduct formal investigations when cooperation is suspected. The accused inmate may be questioned directly, not by someone claiming authority, but in seemingly casual conversations designed to reveal inconsistencies or admissions. Their housing unit might be searched for paperwork that could indicate cooperation. Their mail is monitored for correspondence with prosecutors or law enforcement. The burden of proof is reversed from the official justice system. In the free world, you're innocent until proven guilty. Under the code, you're guilty until you prove innocence, and proving you haven't talked to authorities is nearly impossible. Even being accused is often sufficient for punishment. The paperwork trail. One of the most dangerous pieces of evidence an inmate can possess is paperwork. Documents that detail their criminal case, cooperation agreements, or testimony. In LA County Jail, checking paperwork has become a standard practice when gang members doubt someone's credibility. New arrivals to housing units are routinely required to produce documentation of their charges and criminal history. This practice, while prohibited by jail regulations, happens constantly because gang members need to verify that newcomers aren't sex offenders, informants, or former law enforcement, all categories marked for violence. Inmates who cannot or will not produce paperwork face immediate suspicion. Those whose paperwork reveals sealed cases, reduced charges, or testimony clauses face immediate danger. The documents become evidence in an informal court system that operates with ruthless efficiency. According to documented gang procedures, some organizations maintain their own filing systems within facilities, collecting and storing copies of paperwork on inmates who have violated codes. These files are passed between generations of inmates, creating institutional memory that can follow someone for decades. An inmate who cooperated with authorities in a case years earlier might find that information waiting for them in a new facility, carried by someone who never knew them but has access to the organization's records. The spectrum of punishment. Not all violations of the no-snitching rule result in death, but all result in violence. The severity of punishment corresponds to the perceived severity of the cooperation and the status of both the violator and those affected. At the lower end, punishment might involve checking, a beating that serves as both punishment and warning. These assaults are carefully calibrated to cause pain and injury without attracting overwhelming official response. They happen in blind spots, executed quickly by multiple attackers, designed to teach a lesson while maintaining plausible deniability about who was responsible. Mid-level violations, such as providing information that led to disciplinary charges against other inmates, typically result in more severe beatings that may require medical attention. The victim is often also put off the yard, meaning they're forced to request protective custody or transfer to avoid continued violence. This social exile carries its own punishment, marking the person as unable to function in general population. The most serious violations, cooperation that leads to criminal charges, testimony in court cases, or information that damages gang operations, carry death sentences. These executions are often planned carefully, waiting for moments when official supervision is minimal. They may involve multiple attackers using improvised weapons called shanks or pointed instruments in official reports, sharpened pieces of metal, plastic, or other materials fashioned into stabbing weapons. According to medical examiner reports from jail deaths in LA County, many homicides inside the facility show evidence of multiple stab wounds, indicating group attacks rather than individual violence. These coordinated assaults reflect the organized nature of the enforcement system. The role of corruption. The enforcement of the no-snitching rule is aided, whether intentionally or inadvertently, by corruption within the jail system itself. Multiple investigations have documented instances of Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies providing information to inmates, facilitating violence, or turning blind eyes to assaults in exchange for money, drugs, or simply an easier work environment. A federal investigation into Men's Central Jail revealed patterns of excessive force by deputies, inadequate supervision, and in some cases active cooperation between staff and gang members. While most deputies don't actively participate in the enforcement of inmate codes, the institutional culture and severe understaffing create environments where enforcers operate with relative freedom. The mathematics are simple. A deputy supervising 200 inmates in a housing unit cannot see everything. They cannot be everywhere. When violence happens in seconds and involves coordinated attacks, even well-intentioned staff arrive too late. Enforcers understand these limitations and exploit them ruthlessly. Some deputies reportedly subscribe to a philosophy of letting inmates police themselves, viewing the gang hierarchies as tools for maintaining order rather than threats to institutional security. This perspective, while perhaps pragmatic in the face of overwhelming numbers, effectively cedes authority to the very organizations that enforce the no-snitching rule. The psychological warfare. Beyond physical violence, enforcers employ sophisticated psychological tactics to maintain the rule. Inmates who cooperate with authorities don't just face assault. They face systematic campaigns of intimidation designed to break them mentally before any physical violence occurs. These campaigns might include constant verbal harassment, threats against family members on the outside, destruction of personal property, contamination of food, and social isolation. The message is clear. Cooperation with authorities doesn't just endanger you physically, it makes your daily existence unbearable. According to mental health professionals who work in correctional settings, this constant stress creates severe psychological trauma that can persist long after release. Inmates facing this pressure often develop symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, including hypervigilance, anxiety, depression, and in some cases, psychotic breaks from reality. The psychological toll extends beyond direct victims. Every inmate in the facility witnesses the enforcement of the code and internalizes the lesson. They see what happens to snitches. They understand the consequences. They adjust their behavior accordingly. The enforcement against one person becomes a deterrent for thousands. The informant's dilemma. Despite the overwhelming risks, some inmates still choose to cooperate with authorities. Understanding why reveals the impossible choices created by the no-snitching rule. Some cooperate because they're facing life sentences and cooperation offers the only path to reduce time. Others witness violence so extreme that moral obligation overcomes fear. Some are coerced by law enforcement through threats of additional charges or pressure on family members. And some simply miscalculate, believing they can cooperate confidentially without discovery. Law enforcement agencies maintain formal informant programs, offering various degrees of protection and incentive. The FBI, DEA, and local prosecutors all cultivate sources inside the LA County jail system, seeking information about gang operations, drug trafficking, and violent crimes. These agencies promise confidentiality, protection, and legal benefits in exchange for cooperation. But these promises often prove hollow against the reality of the enforcement system. Confidentiality is breached through court filings, protection is temporary, and legal benefits mean nothing if you don't survive long enough to receive them. Informants find themselves trapped between law enforcement demanding information and gang members promising death if they provide it. The cost of silence. The irony of the enforcement system is that it victimizes everyone, including those it claims to protect. By making cooperation impossible, the no-snitching rule ensures that predators operate freely. Sexual assault, theft, extortion, and random violence go unreported and unpunished. The weak suffer in silence while the strong exploit them without consequence. Documented research shows that the inmate code, particularly the no-snitching rule, creates conditions where vulnerable populations face the greatest danger. Inmates with mental illness, those with developmental disabilities, first-time offenders, and anyone perceived as weak become targets precisely because the code prevents them from seeking help. The enforcement system also victimizes those who maintain it. Gang members spend their sentences watching for violations, investigating suspected cooperation, and carrying out violence that adds years to their own sentences. They live in constant paranoia, knowing that any mistake in judgment, attacking an innocent person failing to attack a guilty one, could cost them their own status or lives. The eternal watch. As afternoon count concludes and inmates return to their housing units, the enforcers resume their surveillance. They watch the new arrivals being processed. They note who speaks to deputies. They track who receives visits from attorneys. They maintain the system that makes the no-snitching rule operational. This is not chaos. This is not random violence. This is organized governance operating with rules, hierarchies, and enforcement mechanisms that rival official institutions in their effectiveness. And at the center of this governance sits the prohibition against cooperation, the rule that kills more people than any official policy, protected by enforcers who operate in plain sight yet remain largely untouchable. But enforcement is only one part of the equation. To fully understand the deadliest rule, we must examine those who violated it and paid the ultimate price. The snitches, the informants, and the cooperators whose stories end in blood. The price of breaking silence. In the documented history of the Los Angeles County jail system, countless names appear in incident reports, medical examiner files, and investigative records. Most fade into obscurity, statistical entries in a system that processes hundreds of thousands of people each year. But some names persist, not because of what these individuals did on the streets but because of what they said inside the walls. This is the final chapter in understanding the deadliest rule in Los Angeles. The stories of those who broke silence and the machinery of violence that consumed them. These aren't tales of heroes or villains. They're examinations of impossible choices, institutional failures, and the brutal mathematics of survival in America's largest jail system. The anatomy of a snitch killing. To understand how the no-snitching rule claims lives, we must examine the typical sequence of events that transforms cooperation into death. While specific cases vary, documented patterns emerge from investigative records and court proceedings involving jail homicides. The sequence often begins with a criminal case. An inmate faces serious charges, perhaps decades in prison or life without parole. Prosecutors offer a deal, provide information about other criminals, testify in ongoing cases, or cooperate in investigations, and receive reduced charges or sentencing recommendations. The promise is concrete and immediate. The danger seems abstract and distant. Some inmates accept these deals believing they can cooperate secretly. Others accept knowing the risks but calculating that decades in prison represent a worse fate than the possibility of violence. Still others are coerced through threats against family members or additional charges stacked until cooperation becomes the only viable option. The cooperation happens in various forms. Sometimes it's a written statement identifying co-defendants or describing criminal activities. Other times it's testimony before grand juries or at preliminary hearings. In some cases, it involves wearing recording devices or participating in controlled conversations designed to gather evidence against others. Law enforcement agencies make promises of confidentiality. Prosecutors file documents under seal. Testimony happens in closed proceedings. But in the interconnected world of criminal justice, where defendants share attorneys, review discovery materials, and compare notes through networks of friends and family, secrets rarely remain secret for long. The information travels through multiple channels. Court documents, even when filed under seal, may be accessed by attorneys representing co-defendants. Family members attending court proceedings notice who testifies and share observations with incarcerated relatives. Jail calls, though supposedly monitored, become conduits for information about who's cooperating. Even the pattern of charges, one defendant facing decades while his co-defendant receives probation, tells a story that everyone can read. The investigation. When word reaches the jail that someone may have cooperated, the gang investigation begins. This isn't a formal process with written procedures, but it follows patterns refined over decades of institutional operation. The suspected cooperator is observed closely. His behavior is analyzed for signs of guilt, nervousness around certain inmates, attempts to avoid specific areas, requests for transfer or protective custody. His paperwork is demanded and scrutinized for evidence of cooperation agreements, testimony clauses, or reduced charges that can't be explained by legitimate legal strategy. According to documented gang procedures, some organizations conduct formal courts, where the accused is questioned about allegations of cooperation. These proceedings mock judicial process while operating with deadly seriousness. The accused must answer questions about their case, explain discrepancies in their paperwork, and account for any evidence suggesting they violated the code. The burden of proof falls entirely on the accused. You cannot prove you didn't cooperate. You can only fail to prove you did, and suspicion is often sufficient for conviction. Gang members understand that false denials are themselves violations of code, so many accused cooperators find themselves trapped. Admit cooperation and face certain violence, or deny cooperation and face violence based on evidence they cannot refute. In some cases, gang members on the outside are contacted to verify information. Phone calls are made to associates in other facilities where the accused previously served time. Research is conducted into the accused criminal history, looking for patterns of cooperation in past cases. This distributed intelligence network can uncover cooperation that occurred years earlier, in different jurisdictions involving different cases. The marking. Once an inmate is confirmed or strongly suspected of violating the no-snitching rule, they are marked for violence. The specific terminology varies by organization: no good, green lit, bad business. But the meaning is universal. This person is not protected, and violence against them is authorized or even required. The marking happens through communication channels that operate constantly throughout the facility. Shot callers pass word to their subordinates. Messages are sent through coded language in letters or during phone calls. In some cases, formal green light lists are circulated, though most communication is verbal to avoid creating evidence. According to law enforcement intelligence, some gang organizations maintain multiple levels of green lights. A hard green light means the target should be killed on sight by any gang member who encounters them. A soft green light authorizes violence but doesn't require it, leaving room for individual judgment. Some green lights are temporary, lasting until specific debts are paid or apologies are made. Others are permanent, following the target until they leave the system or die within it. The marking creates an impossible situation for the target. They can request protective custody, but that requires admitting why they need protection, which can result in being housed with other informants and sex offenders, a status that follows them throughout their time in custody and potentially on the streets after release. They can try to transfer to another facility, but the marking often transfers with them through gang communication networks. They can try to handle their business by paying a substantial tax or submitting to a beating, but many markings are non-negotiable. The violence. When the violence comes, it typically follows patterns dictated by institutional opportunity rather than personal animosity. The attackers often have no direct connection to the cooperation. They're simply gang members obligated to enforce the code when they encounter marked targets. Documented homicides in LA County jails show common characteristics. Multiple attackers coordinate their assault, overwhelming the victim and any potential defenders. Improvised weapons are used, shanks manufactured from razor blades melted into toothbrush handles, sharpened pieces of metal from bed frames or food trays, and hardened plastic fashioned into stabbing instruments. The attacks happen in areas with minimal surveillance: bathrooms, blind spots in housing units, corners of day rooms during periods of high activity when deputies are distracted. The violence is often extreme beyond what would be necessary to kill. Medical examiner reports document victims with dozens of stab wounds, indicating prolonged attacks that continue well after the victim has been incapacitated. This excessive violence serves multiple purposes. It ensures death, it demonstrates the severity of the code violation, and it sends a message to everyone who witnesses the aftermath. In cases where death isn't the intended outcome, perhaps a beating rather than execution, the violence is calibrated but still severe. Victims sustain broken bones, traumatic brain injuries, and permanent disfigurement. The message is the same whether the victim survives or dies. This is what happens when you violate the code. The institutional response. When violence occurs, jail staff respond according to established emergency protocols. Medical teams are summoned. The facility may be locked down while investigators examine the scene. Suspects are identified through witness interviews and surveillance footage review. Incident reports are filed. Additional criminal charges may be pursued against the attackers. But this official response rarely achieves justice in any meaningful sense. Witnesses refuse to identify attackers, citing fear of retaliation. Surveillance footage shows chaos but rarely provides clear evidence of individual actions. Victims who survive often refuse to cooperate with investigations, knowing that testifying against their attackers would be another violation of the code, and there's no protective custody that can keep them safe forever. According to patterns documented in federal oversight reports, most jail homicides remain officially unsolved despite occurring in controlled environments with limited populations and extensive surveillance. The same code that prevented the victim from cooperating with authorities earlier now prevents witnesses from cooperating in the investigation of their murder. Attackers face minimal consequences. Additional charges might be filed, but inmates already serving long sentences have little to lose from additional years. Some view the charges as badges of honor, proof of their willingness to enforce the code. The gang organization that ordered the violence often provides support, money for commissary, legal assistance, and elevated status within the hierarchy. The ripple effects. Every violation of the no-snitching rule and its subsequent punishment creates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate victim. Family members lose sons, fathers, and brothers to a system that promised to keep them safe until trial. Communities lose members to violence that official crime statistics never capture. And most significantly, every enforcement of the code strengthens the rule itself. Other inmates witness what happened. If not the violence itself, then certainly the aftermath. They see the victim's blood being cleaned from the dayroom floor. They hear the details whispered in conversations. They understand the lesson. This is what happens to snitches. The deterrent effect is profound and lasting. Research on prison social dynamics indicates that witnessing violence against code violators significantly decreases willingness to cooperate with authorities among other inmates. Each enforcement becomes a teaching moment that educates hundreds or thousands of people about the consequences of breaking silence. The violence doesn't just punish the individual violator, it reinforces the code for everyone. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle where violence produces silence, silence enables more violence, and the cycle continues indefinitely. Predators operate freely knowing their victims cannot report them. Gang hierarchies maintain power knowing challenges cannot be addressed through official channels. And the deadliest rule in Los Angeles County becomes more entrenched with each victim it claims. The impossible choice. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the no-snitching rule is that it creates situations where every available choice leads to harm. Consider the position of an inmate who witnesses a violent crime inside the facility. Choice 1. Report the crime to authorities. This seems like the moral option, providing justice for the victim and potentially preventing future violence. But it violates the code, marking the witness for violence that may be more severe than what they witnessed. It also identifies them as unreliable to other inmates, destroying any social support network they've built. Choice 2. Remain silent. This protects the witness from immediate retaliation and maintains their standing with other inmates. But it allows the perpetrator to continue operating freely, potentially victimizing others. It also means the witness must live with the moral weight of their silence. Choice 3. Handle it internally through the gang hierarchy. This maintains the code while potentially addressing the situation. But it cedes authority to organizations built on violence and extortion, strengthening systems that harm everyone in the long term. There is no good choice. The no-snitching rule ensures that every option available to inmates involves compromise, danger, or moral injury. This is why the rule is so effective. It doesn't just prevent cooperation through fear of consequences, it creates an entire framework where cooperation becomes logically indefensible even for those who want to do the right thing. The system's failure. The persistence of the no-snitching rule and its death toll represent fundamental failures at multiple levels of the criminal justice system. These failures begin before incarceration, continue throughout detention, and extend beyond release. At the arrest and charging stage, prosecutors routinely make cooperation agreements without adequately protecting cooperators. Information that should remain confidential appears in court filings. Testimony that should be protected becomes public record. And inmates who cooperate in good faith find themselves marked for death because the system failed to maintain the secrecy it promised. During detention, jail administrators struggle with overcrowding so severe that meaningful supervision becomes impossible. According to facility data, the LA County jail system houses nearly 22,000 people in spaces designed for far fewer. Deputies are overwhelmed by the numbers they're expected to supervise. Gang intelligence units are understaffed and under-resourced. And the infrastructure for truly protecting vulnerable inmates doesn't exist at the scale needed. Classification systems that should separate gang members from their rivals and victims from their predators fail repeatedly. Inmates marked for violence are housed in the same units as those tasked with attacking them. Informants are identified through administrative mistakes that expose their cooperation. and the official mechanisms meant to prevent violence prove inadequate against the sophisticated organization of gang enforcement systems. Mental health services that could identify and support inmates suffering psychological trauma from gang intimidation are severely limited. According to oversight reports, the LA County jail system has faced repeated criticism for inadequate mental health care, leaving vulnerable inmates without support as they navigate impossible situations. The economic dimension. Behind every discussion of jail violence and gang control lies an economic reality rarely addressed in official discourse. The no-snitching rule protects lucrative criminal enterprises worth millions of dollars annually. Inside LA County jails, gang organizations operate extensive drug trafficking networks, gambling operations, and protection rackets. These businesses generate substantial revenue that flows back to gang leadership both inside facilities and on the streets. The no-snitching rule ensures these operations continue unimpeded by official intervention. Inmates who could expose these operations face death if they cooperate. Witnesses who could testify about gang taxation face violence if they speak. And the economic interests behind the code create powerful incentives for maintaining silence that go beyond cultural tradition or personal loyalty. According to law enforcement estimates, the Mexican mafia alone generates millions of dollars annually through operations inside California's jails and prisons. These funds support gang operations on the streets, finance legal defenses for incarcerated members, and provide commissary money and other benefits that strengthen organizational loyalty. The no-snitching rule protects this economic engine by ensuring that internal operations remain invisible to authorities. The human cost. Beyond statistics and patterns, each violation of the no-snitching rule represents an individual human tragedy. These are people who made impossible choices under unimaginable pressure. Some cooperated hoping for reduced sentences that would let them return to their families. Others testified believing they were doing the right thing. Many were coerced into cooperation by law enforcement tactics that exploited their vulnerability. Their deaths are not abstract policy failures. They're sons who will never come home, fathers whose children grew up without them, brothers whose families received bodies instead of release dates. The families of these victims often learn only partial truths about what happened, filtered through official incident reports that rarely capture the full context of gang enforcement and code violations. And beyond those who died, countless others live with the psychological scars of navigating this system. Inmates who witnessed enforcement of the code but survived carry trauma that manifests in anxiety, hypervigilance, and difficulty trusting authority. Those who were threatened but managed to avoid violence live with the knowledge that they were marked for death and escaped through luck rather than any protection the system provided. The unchanging reality. As evening count begins and another day ends in the LA County jail system, the deadliest rule remains firmly in place. Tomorrow new inmates will arrive and learn the code. Gang hierarchies will continue their surveillance for violations. And somewhere in the sprawling complex of facilities, the next victim of the no-snitching rule will make the decision that seals their fate. This is not ancient history. This is not a problem that has been solved. According to the most recent available data, 103 people have died in LA County jails since the start of 2023. While not all these deaths result from code enforcement, the violence enabled by the no-snitching rule permeates every aspect of life in these facilities. Reform efforts continue. Oversight bodies propose changes. Civil rights organizations file lawsuits. Politicians promise improvements. But the deadliest rule in Los Angeles County endures because it's not enforced by the institution. It's enforced by the people living within it, and they face more immediate consequences from the shadow government than from official authority. Until the fundamental dynamics change, until cooperation becomes safer than silence, until protection is genuine rather than theoretical, until the economic interests behind the code are disrupted, the rule will continue claiming lives. The mathematics of survival will continue favoring silence. And the deadliest rule in Los Angeles will remain exactly that, a prohibition so powerful, so ruthlessly enforced, and so deeply embedded in institutional culture that words themselves become fatal. This is the reality of America's largest jail system, where 22,000 people live under a constitution written in blood, enforced through violence and maintained by a simple rule: never cooperate, never tell, never break silence. The price of violating this rule isn't measured in additional charges or lost privileges. It's measured in lives lost, families destroyed, and a system that continues failing those it's supposed to protect. The deadliest rule in Los Angeles County isn't deadly because of what it prohibits. It's deadly because of how perfectly it's enforced, how impossible it is to escape, and how completely it has captured control of an institution that officially belongs to the state but operationally belongs to those who enforce the code.